Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Fantasy Football Actuary Podcast. I'm your host, Brock Talby, the Fantasy Football Actuary. So, I'm sure a lot of you are excited to either be in the playoffs or to have secured a first round bye. And then I'm sure there's some of you that are out there still waiting on results from the Tuesday night game. I know pushing games back further and further. It's tough waiting for results, not knowing if you're going to be in the playoffs or not. Hopefully, you've already secured your playoff spot. Hopefully, you're happy with your draw and your matchups, and your team is looking ready to go. Hopefully, this podcast can just help you fine tune your decision making for this Week 14 first round playoffs. Like other Tuesday episodes, we will jump into congratulate or commiserate first. If you're new to the podcast, this is where I talk about how I did in my 3 leagues, and then we go to some listeners to hear how they did as well. So it is a big congratulate for me. I won all 3 of my leagues, and I am now in the playoffs for all 3. I already had the 12-team Superflex and my Dynasty Style Reality Sports League. Both of those were locked up. I was in the playoffs. I think I'm the 3 or 4 seed in the Reality Sports League, and I'm either I think I'm the 3 seed in my 12-team Superflex League as well. So those were already locked up. Yeah, I felt really good about those 2 teams. I'm actually the high point scorer in my 12-team Superflex League as well. Just had some bad matchups through the middle stretch where I happened to play the top 1 or 2 scorers for 3 or 4 weeks in a row. So I was able to bounce back though. I've won a lot in a row. And then the 10-team ESPN Standard League, I was able to win and secure the 6th seed in the playoffs. So I needed to win. And then I had the points tiebreaker over the guy I was playing. So I needed to beat him and hold the points tiebreaker, which obviously if I won, I would have held it. And then I needed one of 2 people to lose. And one of the guys ended up losing. So I passed him in the points tiebreaker as well. So here I am, the 6th seed. It's been a rocky road. I still have Zeke and Baltimore's defense playing tonight, but I have already won because my opponent was playing Antonio Gibson, which segues us into Cameron, a listener who wrote in, and he said he needed just 2 points from Antonio Gibson last night to make the playoffs. And if you watched last night's game, you know how that turned out. Cameron, I am so sorry for you losing on an injury, and an injury that occurred on Antonio Gibson's second carry of the night. He finished with 14 yards, so 1.4 points. You are 0.6 away from making the playoffs. I am sorry for you, Cameron. This actually sucks for me too, Cameron. So I have Antonio Gibson in my 12-team Superflex and my Reality Sports Online League. So both of my playoff teams there are taking a hit with Antonio Gibson getting hurt and probably missing time. I think it came out that he has turf toe. It's a toe injury, so I believe it's turf toe. And turf toe generally has a few week recovery time. I saw a weird study that turf toe actually has a short recovery time in college. It's like 10 days. College athletes are able to bounce back from it. And then in the NFL, the median time to recover from turf toe is like 24 to 27 days or something like that. So we're looking at a multi-week injury for an Antonio Gibson, who was a top 5 running back on the season going into last night's game. That is going to hurt a lot of people's playoff chances, myself included. And obviously it hurt Cameron in a big way because he ended up not making the playoffs. So I'm sorry, Cameron. You can commiserate with everyone else who missed the playoffs. And if you made the playoffs like me, congratulations to you. And our next segment is high flying or nose diving. Usually I look at how a guy has been doing historically the last couple of weeks. This week is going to be more playoff focused. So yeah, these people have been at least consistent the last couple of weeks. But this is more of, hey, I think these guys are set up to succeed for your teams in the playoffs. So my high-flying quarterback is Ryan Tannehill. If you watch the Tennessee Titans versus the Cleveland Browns game, you know that the Tennessee Titans defense is atrocious. So they can't just rely on Derrick Henry to win games. Last year, That was kind of their game plan a lot, was slow the game down, let Derrick Henry run and win the games. But their defense was better then. Their defense is atrocious. The Browns were up by 30 at halftime. The Titans almost came back and won, but the defense is just so bad that Tannehill in the passing game are going to have to be good just to keep up. So that's what we saw this past week with the Browns. And Tannehill always has the impressive AJ Brown, and now he has Corey Davis. Corey Davis has been emerging this season. He was on fire this past week, like 150 yards and a touchdown. So Tannehill's weapons are better than they were last year. And the schedule is just fantastic for Tennessee. They play Jacksonville, Detroit, and Green Bay. All of these games are games that Derrick Henry should be able to run in. And oddly enough, I saw a stat that Tannehill's average fantasy output is a lot higher in games where Derrick Henry rushes for 125 yards than in games where Derrick Henry rushes for less than 125 yards. So you'd think that Tannehill would kind of take a hit, but that is not the case. Generally, Tannehill is better when Derrick Henry is better. So with these three matchups, Derrick Henry is set to feast in the playoffs, and I think Tannehill is going to follow suit. My nose diving quarterback is Cam Newton. I streamed Cam Newton in week 12, and he scored 3 points for me. He was atrocious, and I thought, I will never trust Cam Newton again. And then he came out and threw for 69 passing yards, and my anger was validated, right? Well, Cam was the QB8 on the week with only 69 passing yards. Along with that paltry 69 passing yards, Cam threw 1 touchdown, and he rushed for 48 yards and 2 touchdowns. The Patriots won 45-0 against the Chargers, and Cam only threw 69 yards. It's actually insane when you just look at it like that. Streaming Cam means praying for rushing touchdowns, which will probably be hard to come by because he has a pretty tough playoff stretch against the Rams, Miami, and Buffalo. So I would say don't stream Cam. Despite what he did this past week, he only threw 69 passing yards. So if he doesn't get those rushing touchdowns, he's a terrible quarterback play. So don't stream Cam. My recommendation is stay away. My high-flying running back is David Montgomery. I had him ranked at RB2 heading into the week, and boy, did I miss. Because he was RB1 on the week. Yes, David Montgomery, your perennial, season-long, steady as they come, running back 2, that 15 to 24 range, he was running back 1 this week. And I had him ranked at running back 2 because of the Detroit matchup. Detroit is atrocious against running backs, and that panned out. David Montgomery, RB1 for week 13. He's been so involved in the passing game since Tariq Cohen went out with an injury at the beginning of the season that David Montgomery is actually sitting at 7th in running back receptions on the year. And this gives him a nice floor for when his rushing game isn't very strong, which we've seen several times this year. But I don't expect poor rushing games coming in the next 3 weeks. The playoff weeks, David Montgomery plays against Houston, Minnesota, and Jacksonville. That is one of the best running back schedules. It's probably only second to Derrick Henry, honestly. So David Montgomery is set up for success here with the safe floor of his receiving work, coupled with that just delicious fantasy matchup for all 3 weeks. I think he is no longer a flex play. I think he is a borderline RB1 for the next 3 weeks in the playoffs. So don't him-haw around and think, should I play David Montgomery? He's had some down weeks. He's been a steady RB2, low-end RB2 to flex play probably for your team all year. He is not a flex play for the playoffs. He is a borderline RB1, and he should be in your lineup all 3 weeks. Side note, David Montgomery will be in my lineup all 3 weeks in my Reality Sports Online League. He was going to be in probably over Kareem Hunt either way. And now with Antonio Gibson going out, David Montgomery is going to be relied upon for me to actually do well in the playoffs in that league. Speaking of Kareem Hunt, my nose-diving running back is Kareem Hunt. It's been really bad for Hunt lately, and I can't see a world in which I start him against Baltimore for week 1 in the playoffs. Even with Antonio Gibson going out, I have Kenyon Drake on my bench too. So I have good running back depth in that dynasty-style league. So I'm not playing Kareem Hunt even with Antonio Gibson out. I'm going to Kenyon Drake. Kareem Hunt has been held to 62 yards or under for 3 straight games, and he's only scored double-digit fantasy points once since week 7. That's half of the regular season with only one game in the double digits. With Baltimore on tap, I'm doing all I can to not have Kareem Hunt in my lineup because I think it's too important to rely on him in week 1 of the fantasy playoffs. If you lose, you're out. And I don't think Kareem Hunt against Baltimore is what you want to rely on when it's lose and you're done. My high-flying wide receiver is Robert Woods. He's been okay the last couple weeks, but listen to these numbers: 14, 11, and 11. Those are the targets for Robert Woods over the last 3 games. He's a target monster, and the Rams have a nice-looking playoff schedule coming up. The Patriots are the first round playoff matchup for the Rams, which looks potentially bad if you're just looking at it on paper. You saw the Patriots take it to Justin Herbert and the Chargers this past week, but Herbert is a rookie. I think Goff can be relied upon more so than Justin Herbert. And ultimately, the Patriots are just 19th in adjusted half-point PPR points allowed to the opposing wide receivers. So it's not a terrible matchup for Robert Woods. It's a top 3rd matchup for Robert Woods. And like I said, he hasn't been stellar the last couple weeks, but he's been a steady contributor due to that large target volume and a high amount of catches. This past week, he had 10 catches. So any kind of PPR league, my models expect Woods to continue being a steady contributor for your team at the bare minimum, and he has a high probability of some boom games against the Jets and Seattle in weeks 15 and 16 after this coming Patriots matchup, which I don't think the Patriots are a bad matchup for Robert Woods. I would keep him in my lineup, and then I would love having him in my lineup in weeks 15 and 16 against the Jets and the Seahawks. My nose-diving wide receiver is Devontae Parker. He was ejected from this past weekend's game for throwing punches during a team brawl against the Bengals, and it sounds like he's not going to be suspended any further than that, but I really think Parker is unplayable either way. In his last 7 games, Parker only has double-digit fantasy points in 2 of them, which is similar to the awfulness that we've seen from Kareem Hunt. And just 2 games on the season, Parker has 100 receiving yards or more, and that's with Fitzpatrick playing about half of those games. So it's not like he's been super good with Fitzpatrick and bad with Tua. He only has 2 100-yard receiving games on the whole season. And Tua is the starter currently, and he does not sling it around like Fitzpatrick does. So with Tua starting, Parker should be nowhere near your starting lineup this week against the Chiefs to start your playoffs. My high-flying tight end is Rob Gronkowski. He is coming off the bye, so he did not play this week, but he is still my high-flying tight end nonetheless. His playoff schedule is Minnesota, Atlanta, and Detroit, all 3 defenses that Brady should be able to dominate against for your fantasy playoffs. There are a lot of mouths to feed in Tampa. I know that, and I know that might be worrying to some people, but I think that caps the wide receivers upside more so than Gronk's. I don't think Gronk is necessarily hurt by so many wide receivers. I think the wide receivers are hurt by so many wide receivers. Gronk and Mike Evans appear to be the favored red zone targets for Brady, and that makes Gronk a top tight end just based on touchdown probability alone. And then you factor in Gronk's propensity to catch 1 or 2 longer passes a game for a good yard floor. And then you add in the fantastic playoff opponents on top of that. Gronk should be started in every week of your playoff run. Book it now. My nose diving tight end. There's no studs that just dropped the ball this week, but Jordan Akins is my nose diving tight end because he was such a disappointment. I picked him up in my Reality Sports Online League where Mark Andrews was still out for me due to COVID. And I was hoping that Jordan Akins would be more involved because of the Will Fuller suspension. But it looks like Akins will remain uninvolved and is not a good tight end going forward. If you picked him up to stream him because Will Fuller was gone and you were hoping that Akins would be more involved, I think just drop Akins. Don't bank on that at all. And we'll move in next to the straight fire from the waiver wire. As this is week 14 and the first round of the playoffs, hopefully most of these are just depth pieces for you and you're not looking for starts. I assume if you made the playoffs, you have a solid core and a solid base to work around, and your lineup is 90 to 95% set. Hopefully, these guys are just on going on your bench for depth in case of injuries or surprise COVID games missed. So I really hope if you're in the playoffs that you're not relying on most of these guys to start this coming week. That being said, my top target at running back is JD McKissic. Like we mentioned earlier, Antonio Gibson is dealing with a toe injury that he sustained on the second carry of the game, and he never returned from. McKissic was ineffective in the running game. He only had 5 carries for 8 yards or something. Peyton Barber ended up with 14 carries, but he was also really bad. He only had 23 rushing yards. But McKissic was hyper efficient in the passing game where he caught all 10 of his targets for 70 yards. Yep, he had 10 catches, which is crazy. If Gibson misses time, which it sounds like it could be a multi-week injury like I mentioned, McKissic will be on the field even more, which may not translate to rushing yards, but it should equate to ridiculous target and catch numbers like we saw last night. Any type of PPR format, half point PPR, full point PPR especially, any type of PPR format, McKissic is a solid flex play as long as Antonio Gibson is out because he will be on the field more and he will get a ton of passing work. Other running backs to consider, Ty Johnson came in for the Jets when Frank Gore suffered an early concussion, and Johnson rushed for 104 yards and a touchdown on 22 carries. But the next 2 games are at Seattle and at the Rams, and he's on the Jets. So take your shot if you want. He's probably the starter as long as Gore is out, but I would not trust a New York Jets running back at Seattle and at the Rams. Ito Smith, he's a decent depth piece since Todd Gurley is clearly injured. Todd Gurley was active technically this past week, but he was more. I saw before the game that they listed him as situational. So hopefully you caught that and did not play Todd Gurley in your lineups this past week. He's obviously still injured. Ito Smith is a decent depth piece. And you could also consider picking up some high profile backups or change of pace backs like Tony Pollard or Chase Edmonds if they are available. This late in the game, you're just looking for high upside depth pieces or backups, someone on your bench that could help you in the playoffs. Hopefully most of your lineups set, like I said. So if you pick up Pollard or Chase Edmonds and Ezekiel Elliott or Kenyon Drake go down, you have an automatic RB1 on your bench that you can just slide right in and help you win some playoff championships. My top wide receiver to grab this week is Keke Coutee, and honestly, how could it not be? He came into the Will Fuller role seamlessly, and he's playing with one of the best QBs in the league right now. It is worth noting that Brandon Cooks did leave the game for a while with an injury, but Coutee looked like the top target either way, even when Brandon Cooks was out there. Cooks did come back in, but Coutee was the one that led the way. He had over 140 yards. He didn't catch a touchdown, but he had over 140 yards and seemed to fit right into that Will Fuller role. The schedule doesn't look that good until week 16 when the Texans get to play the Bengals, but his next opponent, the Bears, just got lit up by Matthew Stafford and Marvin Jones, so it's not like it's an impossible matchup. I mean, Matthew Stafford and Marvin Jones just destroyed the Bears this past week. The Bears are kind of floundering right now. They've lost 7 in a row, I believe. So I don't have any confidence in the Bears defense. There's just no motivation there. And then the week 15 opponent is the Indianapolis Colts again, which is who Coutee just lit up this past week. So 2 seemingly not very good matchups, but I think you could probably play him in both. And then week 16, like I said, is the Bengals, just a fantastic matchup. The volume should be there. Deshaun Watson is going to keep throwing the ball a ton, so you could do way worse than a player that I'm deeming Will Fuller light. Other wide receivers to consider, Cole Beasley bounced back this past week. He went for 9 for 130 and a touchdown, and he should continue to be involved with John Brown on IR. It didn't pan out last week. He saved his fantasy day from being a total bust by throwing a touchdown, but he only had 23 receiving yards, so it might be a little more volatile than, say, Stephon Diggs, who's been consistently dominant as the wide receiver 1 on that team. But Cole Beasley definitely has the upside, as we saw last night. Tim Patrick continues to get it done. He had 2 more TDs on Monday or on Sunday night, despite suspect quarterback play. I think he only has 4 or 5 total touchdowns on the year, and 2 of them came in this past week. So he doesn't really have huge touchdown upside, but he is the clear top target in Denver. Um, and he's been getting it done even with Drew Lock being awful. T.Y. Hilton is somehow relevant again. He went for 100 receiving yards for the first time since Andrew Luck was playing back in 2018. So T.Y. Hilton, hopefully you don't have to rely on T.Y. Hilton. I don't think it's going to feel good to start T.Y. Hilton in your first round of your playoffs. And then the last wide receiver I'll mention, Allen Lazard. He's a high upside play with Aaron Rodgers throwing in the ball. I think he only had 3 catches for 50 yards or something like that this past week. But he's a very high upside play. If you have injuries or someone go down to COVID, you can throw Lazard in there as a dart throw, and he could boom for 20 plus fantasy points. My top tight end from the waiver wire is Logan Thomas. He had his best game of the season yesterday with 9 catches for 98 yards and a touchdown. There are worse streaming tight ends at the position, but hopefully this is purely a depth move for you, and you're just getting a backup tight end in case of injury or COVID. I don't want to play Logan Thomas as my starting tight end in the playoffs, but you could do worse as a backup. Other tight ends to consider if you need more depth at the position heading into the playoffs. Jordan Reed, he's getting about 6 targets a game for the 49ers while George Kittle's out. So the target volume's there. And then Cole Kmet for the Bears. He appears to be stepping up. It looks like he has passed Jimmy Graham. But like I said, please don't play these guys. Don't play these guys in the first round of the playoffs. They are not going to win you playoff matchups. They are there purely for depth in case you lose your starting tight end. And we will wrap things up on this Tuesday episode with my favorite quarterback streamers of the week. My favorite quarterback streamer, he's available in about 40% of leagues. I think he's owned in 60% of leagues on ESPN. It's Ryan Tannehill. Like I mentioned earlier, he is my top option. He's one of my top options for the playoffs in general, but he gets Jacksonville this week. And because of those beautiful matchups in the next 3 weeks, you could pick Tannehill up as a streamer this week and just lock him into your starting lineup as the starter going forward. And he will win people fantasy championships. In my Reality Sports Online League, you start 2 quarterbacks. So Ryan Tannehill is one of my starting quarterbacks. He is locked in, and I'm hoping for big things from Ryan Tannehill. After that, it gets a little dicey. I think my second favorite widely available streamer is Jared Goff. He has a decent matchup at home against New England. I know New England kind of dominated Justin Herbert, but Justin Herbert is a rookie. He doesn't have the same offensive line that Jared Goff has. And Jared Goff is pretty good when he's not being pressured, which New England pressures quarterbacks at one of the lower rates in the league. So I think Jared Goff should be able to stay in the pocket and just throw darts to Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp and get it done for you as a streaming option. And then my final name I will mention, Andy Dalton does play the Bengals in Week 14. It's a great matchup, but playing Dalton is terrifying. He does have Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb and Michael Gallup and Ezekiel Elliott. He has the weapons in a great matchup. If you're super desperate in a 2-quarterback league, I could see playing Andy Dalton. In a single quarterback league, I hope that you have better options. And that will wrap up the Tuesday episode. For the full Week 14 model rankings, those will be available on the website on Thursday. The website is thefantasyfootballactuary.com. If you want to watch video versions of this episode or any future episodes of the podcast, you can check the YouTube channel. It is The Fantasy Football Actuary. If you are watching on there, be sure to like the video and subscribe so you can get the future episodes of the podcast as soon as possible. If you want to follow me on Twitter, it is at the FF Actuary. So enjoy the Tuesday evening game. If you are still trying to make the playoffs, hopefully everything goes well for you tonight. And we will be back here on Saturday to do any final prep for the Week 14 first round playoff matchups. Until then, keep crunching those numbers.